Welcome to the AEN Stories channel.
The Grand Meridian Hotel's ballroom was a vision of opulence, a glittering stage for the corporate elite. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen constellations, their light fracturing into 1,000 tiny rainbows that danced across polished silverware, champagne flutes, and the gleaming marble floor. The air buzzed with the clink of glasses, the murmur of practiced laughter, and the undercurrent of ambition that pulsed through every conversation. Men in tailored suits and women in sleek, designer dresses wove through the crowd, their smiles calculated, their words measured, each interaction a carefully choreographed move in a game of power and influence. Elena stood near a towering floral arrangement, its blooms perfuming the air with a heady sweetness. Her black dress hugged her frame, elegant but understated, its simplicity a quiet rebellion against the room's extravagance. Her dark hair was swept into a loose chignon, a few strands falling softly against her neck. She sipped her Pinot Grigio, the cool blast grounding her as her eyes drifted over the crowd, taking in the scene with a mix of detachment and curiosity. Her husband, Mark, wasn't there. He rarely was these days. A late-night conference call with overseas clients had kept him tethered to his office, his voice crackling through the phone earlier that evening, clipped and distracted as always. "Keep an eye on the new guy," Elena had said, his eyes fixed on his laptop screen during their brief video call, as if she were just another task on his endless to-do list. "Daniel, he's sharp, but I don't know him well yet. Just see what he's like outside the office." The request had landed like a stone in her chest, heavy with the weight of their growing distance. A year ago, she wouldn't have questioned it. A year ago, they'd been different partners, lovers, a team navigating the chaos of their early 30s together. They'd spent lazy Sundays tangled in bed, laughing over coffee stains and shared dreams, their future stretching out like an open road. Now, their conversations were brief, transactional, like they were co-workers sharing a cubicle rather than a life. She didn't know why she'd agreed to play spy for him. Maybe it was habit, a reflex born of years of loyalty. Or maybe it was the faint hope that doing this would make her feel closer to him, bridge the gap that had widened over months of missed dinners, unanswered texts, and nights spent alone in their tall large apartment. Elena scanned the room, her gaze settling on Daniel. He stood near the bar, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his posture relaxed but alert, like a man who knew how to blend in without losing himself. He was tall, lean, with dark hair that fell just slightly over his forehead, and eyes that seemed to carry a story deep, searching, and a little guarded. She'd seen him around the office a few times, always moving with a quiet confidence that didn't demand attention, but drew it anyway. Mark had mentioned him in passing, a recent hire, brilliant with numbers, a bit of a wild card. "Just watch him," Mark had said. "See what he's about." The party dragged on, the air thick with the scent of perfume, cologne, and ambition. Elena made small talk with colleagues, her smile polite but strained, her responses automatic. The conversations were hollow endless chatter about quarterly reports, market trends, and who was angling for the next promotion. She felt like an actor in a play she hadn't rehearsed for, her lines delivered with less conviction each time. She needed a break. Slipping through a set of glass doors, she stepped onto the balcony, the cool night air a welcome relief against her skin. The city stretched out before her, a tapestry of neon lights and distant skyscrapers, its pulse a low, constant hum. She pulled a cigarette from her clutch, her guilty habit, one she'd promised Mark she'd quit, but hadn't. The flame of her lighter flickered briefly, illuminating her face as she lit it, exhaling a thin stream of smoke that curled upward into the starless sky. "Mind if I join you?" a voice asked, low and warm, cutting through the quiet like a note from a jazz saxophone. She turned to see Daniel stepping onto the balcony, a cigarette in his hand. Up close, he was even more striking, sharp jawline, a faint shadow of stubble, and those eyes, dark and searching, like they could see right through her carefully constructed facade. He didn't smile, but there was a softness in his expression, a genuine question in his tone, like he wasn't assuming her permission, but asking for it. "Go ahead," Elena said, gesturing to the space beside her. She took another drag, studying him over the glowing tip of her cigarette. Didn't peg you for a smoker? He chuckled, lighting his own with a practiced flick. I'm not, usually. Only at these things. Helps me think. Rough night? She asked, her tone light but curious, testing the waters. He shrugged, exhaling a slow stream of smoke that mingled with hers in the night air. Not rough, just loud. To many people trying to sell themselves. You. She hesitated, surprised by how easily the question slipped past her defenses. Something like that, she said, glancing back at the ballroom through the glass doors. The lights inside seemed garish now, the laughter forced, the chatter a cacophony of posturing. These events always feel like a performance. He nodded, like he understood exactly what she meant. You're not wrong. Everyone's playing a part, except maybe you. He tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. You seem real. The comment caught her off guard, and she laughed softly, more out of nervousness than amusement. Real? You don't even know me. Fair, he said, a small smile tugging at his lips, his eyes crinkling at the corners. But I'm good at reading people. You're not here to impress anyone. You're just here. She didn't know how to respond to that. There was something disarming about him. The way he spoke without pretense, like he wasn't trying to win her over or prove a point. They stood in silence for a moment, the city's hum filling the space between them, the distant honk of a car, the low buzz of neon signs, the faint rhythm of music spilling from the ballroom. Then he asked, So, what's your story? You're married to Mark, right? The guy who runs the show. Her stomach tightened at the mention of Mark. Yeah, she said, her voice quieter now, almost lost in the night air. He's busy tonight. Daniel nodded, not pressing further, but his eyes lingered on her, like he could sense the weight behind her words. Must be tough, being married to someone who's married to their job. She froze, the cigarette halfway to her lips. It was the kind of observation that cut too close, too fast, slicing through the layers of denial she'd wrapped around herself. She wanted to deflect, to laugh it off, but something in his gaze stopped her. It wasn't pity or judgment, just understanding, like he'd seen this story before, maybe lived it himself. It's not always easy, she admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. The words felt like a confession, raw and unfiltered. But you get used to it, do you? He asked, his tone gentle but probing. His eyes locked on hers. Get used to it, I mean. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time that night, she felt seen. Not as Mark's wife, not as the poised plus one at a corporate event, but as Elena, with her own thoughts, her own struggles, her own quiet dreams. The cigarette burned down to ash between her fingers, forgotten, as the city's pulse seemed to slow around them. They talked far longer than she intended, the conversation flowing like a river, meandering through unexpected turns. It started with small things, the absurdity of corporate parties, the city's relentless pace, the shared love of old jazz records, the kind that crackled with soul. But soon, it deepened, the way conversations do when two people find themselves on the same wavelength. She found herself telling him things she hadn't told anyone in months, how she'd started painting again, as the years of setting it aside, how she'd stand in her makeshift studio at 2 a.m., brush in hand, trying to capture something she couldn't name. She told him about the quiet moments she and Mark used to share, back when their love felt like a living thing, not a contract to be maintained. Daniel listened, really listened, not just nodding along but asking questions, offering insights that made her feel like her thoughts mattered. He told her about his own life growing up in a small town where the sky was so big it made you feel small, moving to the city to chase a dream he wasn't sure he believed in anymore. The way he sometimes felt like an outsider in rooms like the one they'd just left. He spoke with a quiet intensity, his words careful but unguarded, like he was choosing to trust her with pieces of himself. There was no flirting, no overt lines crossed, but there was a warmth in their conversation, a connection that felt effortless and dangerous all at once, like standing too close to a flame. When they finally returned to the ballroom, The party was winding down, the crowd thinning, the chandeliers dimming as the night grew late. Elena glanced at her phone. No messages from Mark. She wasn't surprised, but it stung all the same, a sharp reminder of the distance between them. "Guess I'll see you around," Daniel said as they parted ways, his smile soft but genuine, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer than necessary. "Thanks for the company," she nodded, her throat tight, a tangle of emotions she couldn't name. "Yeah, you too." Back at home, Elena sat on the edge of her bed, the events of the night replaying in her mind like a film she couldn't pause. The apartment was silent, Mark still at the office, his absence a familiar ache that had settled into her bones. She thought about Daniel's words, his quiet presence, the way he'd made her laugh for the first time in weeks, the way he'd made her feel like herself again. It wasn't love, not even close, but it was something she hadn't felt in a long time. Connection, understanding, a spark of something alive that made her heart beat a little faster. The next morning, Mark was already gone when she woke up, the bed cold on his side. A note on the counter read, "Back late, meeting with Daniel today." Her heart skipped a beat at the name, and she hated herself for it. She didn't know what to do with the feeling, this small crack in the foundation of her life. Was it betrayal to feel something for someone else, even for a moment? Or was it simply a reminder of what she'd been missing? A mirror held up to the emptiness she'd been ignoring. Over the next few weeks, Elena found herself crossing paths with Daniel more often, each encounter a small jolt to her system. A coffee run during a lunch break, their hands brushing as they reached for the same sugar packet. A quick chat in the office hallway, his laugh warm and unguarded as she teased him about his terrible taste in ties. A shared elevator ride, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. Each moment was brief, innocent, but charged with an unspoken tension that made her pulse race. He never pushed, never crossed a line, but his presence was a constant pull, a reminder of the warmth she'd felt that night on the balcony. Mark, meanwhile, remained a ghost in her life, buried in work, his conversations with her limited to logistics and schedules. She tried to talk to him, to recapture the closeness they'd once had, but he brushed her off, promising they'd catch up soon. Soon never came. The more she tried, the more she felt like she was shouting into a void, her voice echoing back unanswered. She began to wonder if he even noticed her anymore, or if she'd become just another fixture in his life, like the expensive coffee machine he barely used or the framed photos on their mantle that hadn't been updated in years. One afternoon, Elena found herself at the office, dropping off a file Mark had forgotten at home. The office was a hive of activity, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, the low hum of ambition in the air. She spotted Daniel across the room, leaning over a co-worker's desk, pointing at something on a screen. He looked up, their eyes meeting for a brief moment, and he smiled, a small, private smile that made her stomach flip. She turned away quickly, her cheeks warm, and left the office before she could overthink it. That evening, restless and unable to focus, Elena decided to clear her head. She drove to a small jazz club downtown, the Blue Note, a place she hadn't been to in years, tucked away in a narrow alley. Its neon sign flickered faintly, the kind of place that felt like a secret. She'd discovered it in her early 20s, back when she and Mark would spend late nights wandering the city, chasing music and each other's laughter. Now, she went alone, needing the music to drown out the noise in her head, the questions, the doubts, the ache of a life that felt like it was slipping through her fingers. She settled at a small table near the stage, the saxophone's mournful wail wrapping around her like a blanket. The club was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of whiskey and nostalgia. She ordered a glass of wine and let herself sink into the music, her thoughts drifting to the past, to the girl she'd been before marriage, before Mark's career had consumed them both. She'd been an artist then, her days filled with paint and possibility, her nights alive with music and dreams. Somewhere along the way, she'd lost that girl, buried her under the weight of routine and expectation. She didn't notice Daniel until he was standing beside her table, a glass of bourbon in his hand, his expression a mix of surprise and something softer, something that made her heart stutter. "Fancy seeing you here," he said, his voice warm, cutting through the music like a familiar melody. She looked up, a smile tugging at her lips despite herself. "Guess we have the same taste in music." He gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Mind if I?" She nodded, and he sat down, his presence both comforting and unsettling, like a song she knew by heart, but hadn't heard in years. They talked again, the music weaving through their conversation like a third presence. He told her about his favorite Miles Davis album, Kind of Blue, how he'd listened to it on repeat during a tough year in his life, how the notes had felt like a lifeline when everything else was falling apart. She shared how she used to paint to jazz, how the music seemed to guide her brush, pulling colors and shapes from somewhere deep inside her. The hours slipped away, and for the first time in months, Elena felt like herself again, not Mark's wife, not a corporate accessory, but Elena, with her own dreams, her own voice. They talked about everything and nothing: childhood memories, favorite books, the way the city felt alive at night. He told her about his sister, who lived across the country and sent him postcards from every city she visited, each one with a handwritten note that made him laugh. She told him about the summer she'd spent backpacking through Europe, sleeping in hostels and sketching strangers on trains, her sketchbook a map of moments she'd never forget. There was an ease to their conversation, a rhythm that felt natural, like they'd known each other for years instead of weeks. As the night wore on, the club emptied out, the music slowing to a soft, melancholy ballad. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his eyes on her, thoughtful. "You're different here," he said. "Not like at the office or that party. You're lighter." She smiled, a little sad, her fingers tracing the rim of her wineglass. "Maybe because I don't have to pretend here." He nodded, like he understood exactly what she meant. "You shouldn't have to pretend anywhere." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning, a quiet challenge to the life she'd been living. She wanted to say something, to explain the mess of her life, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she sipped her wine, letting the music fill the silence. When the club closed, Daniel walked her to her car. The air was cool, the city quieter now, the streets bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. He stopped a few steps away, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable, like he was holding something back. "Elena," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper, "I don't know what's going on with you and Mark, and it's not my place to ask, but you deserve to be happy. You know that, right?" Her breath caught, a lump rising in her throat. She wanted to say something, to explain, to deflect, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she nodded, her eyes stinging with unshed tears, her heart a tangle of gratitude and guilt. "Take care," he said, and with that, he walked away, his figure disappearing into the night, leaving her standing alone in the quiet street. Back home, Elena sat in the dark, the weight of the night settling over her like a heavy coat. The apartment was silent, Mark still at the office, his absence a familiar ache that had carved itself into her bones. She thought about Daniel, about the way he made her feel seen, valued, alive. She thought about Mark, about the life they'd built together, the promises they'd made, the love that had once felt unbreakable. She didn't know what she wanted, not yet, but she knew something had to change. The next day, she called Mark at the office, her hands trembling as she dialed. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "Tonight." He hesitated, his voice distracted as always, papers shuffling in the background. "Yeah, okay. He'll be home by 8. When he walked through the door that evening, Elena was waiting, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. She'd spent the day replaying their marriage in her mind, the early days of laughter and late-night talks, the slow drift into silence, the way she'd let herself fade into the background of his life. She didn't know where the conversation would lead, whether it would mend what was broken or shatter it entirely, but she knew it was the first step toward something, toward reclaiming herself, toward honesty, toward a future she could believe in. The conversation was hard, raw, the kind that stripped away the layers of pretense they'd both been hiding behind. Mark admitted he'd been neglecting her, that work had consumed him, that he didn't know how to balance it all. He spoke of the pressure he felt, the weight of expectations from his bosses, his clients, himself. Elena listened, really listened, hearing the exhaustion in his voice, the fear he'd never voiced before. She told him about the loneliness, the way she felt invisible, the way she had started to lose herself in the routine of their life. She didn't mention Daniel, not because she was hiding it, but because this wasn't about him, it was about her, about them, about the life they'd let slip away. They didn't solve everything that night, but they really talked for the first time in months. It wasn't a fix, but it was a start, a fragile thread of hope in a tapestry that had begun to unravel. They agreed to try, to carve out time for each other, to rebuild what they'd lost. Mark promised to cut back on late nights, to be present, to listen. Elena promised to be honest, to stop hiding her feelings, to fight for what she needed. In the weeks that followed, Elena and Mark began to rebuild, piece by piece. They set boundaries around work, carved out time for each other, started small traditions like Sunday morning coffee runs to their favorite cafe, where they'd sit by the window and talk about nothing and everything. They went on dates again, awkward at first, like they were reeling each other, but slowly, the laughter returned, the silences grew comfortable, the spark flickered back to life. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, a slow dance towards something better. Elena saw Daniel less often now, their encounters limited to brief nods in the office or passing glances at meetings. She didn't avoid him, but she didn't seek him out either. The spark was still there, faint but undeniable, a quiet what if that lingered in the back of her mind. But she knew it wasn't about him, it was about her, about what she needed to feel whole, to feel alive. She threw herself back into her painting, spending late nights in her studio, the music loud, the canvas a mirror for her soul. She started taking classes, reconnecting with old friends, rediscovering the parts of herself she'd buried for too long. One evening, months later, Elena found herself back at the Blue Note, alone this time. The music was as soulful as ever, the saxophone weaving stories of love and loss, hope and heartbreak. She sipped her wine, her sketchbook open on the table, her pencil moving across the page in quick, fluid strokes. She was drawing again, painting again, rediscovering the artist she'd been before life had dulled her colors. The club was crowded, but she felt at peace, her heart lighter than it had been in years. As the band played their final note, she closed her sketchbook and smiled to herself. She didn't have all the answers, but she was finding her way. She was learning to love herself again, to fight for her own happiness, to build a life that felt like hers. Mark was part of that life, but he wasn't all of it. She was more than a wife, more than a shadow in someone else's story. She was Elena, and she was enough. She stepped out into the night, the city alive around her, its pulse a reminder that she was alive too. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of it. She was ready to write her own story, one brush stroke, one note, one moment at a time. Thank you for listening my story. If you want more raw, real, and gripping stories like this one, subscribe to the End Stories channel. Your support keeps these stories alive.